Hello, I'm Kristen, and my persuasive speech concerns the alleged death of Beatle Paul McCartney in 1966. This was the most elaborate marketing ploy ever devised in the music industry. I will be able to prove this because it actually worked. First, we will look at why it was necessary for the Beatles to devise such a plan. Secondly, how the Beatles devised a long-term plan to complete their mission. And finally, we will learn how the Beatles pulled this off. In March of 1966, John Lennon made a statement concerning the popularity of the Beatles, of the Beatles' popularity and the popularity of Jesus Christ. Mind you, at this time, the Beatles were the most popular band in the world. As with public statements by entertainers, what John said was taken out of context, and what happened next was a firestorm of negative publicity for the Beatles. In cities all over, local radio stations called for all Beatle records to be burned to protest John's statement. The movement was successful, and the popularity of the Beatles began to fall. The protest reached its peak in August of 1966. The irony here is that the Beatles performed their last live concert in San Francisco on August 29, 1966. Citing the need to return to the studio for more creativity and touring had become a burden, and then what happened next set the world on its heels. From July 22, 1963 to August 5, 1966, the Beatles released 13 albums, but now things had changed. The statement, "The road had taken its toll on the lads from Liverpool." So with time on their hands, the Beatles came up with a plan to put them back on the top of the music world. Their music had been progressing with the release of Rubber Soul and Revolver, but the next 4 albums would literally take the Beatles and their fans, those who stayed and those who left, on a magical mystery tour. After 10 months in the studio, the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band on June 1, 1967. Many consider this as the greatest album of all time, but there was something different about this album. It was not only the first concept album, but hidden meanings in the songs began to surface, resurfacing Paul's alleged death. Then, with the release of Magical Mystery, the White Album, finally Abbey Road, the Beatles had completed their rise back to the top. With each album, more clues came out, to the point in the song Glass Onion, from the White Album, John says, "Here's another clue for you. All the walrus was Paul." Radio stations worldwide dove into each album with a fever to discover the truth. At this time, record sales skyrocketed. Not only were their lyrics as clues, but each album had visual clues, such as George Harrison pointing to the line, "Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock when the day begins," from Sgt. Pepper's, to "He blew his mind out in a car," also Sgt. Pepper's, indicating how and when Paul died. The line at the end of the Strawberry Fields song, sung by John, "I buried Paul," to the song "Come Together" from Abbey Road, where during the chorus the fourth "come together" ends in dead instead of yeah. Also, the Abbey Road album cover with the 4 Beatles walking across the street with Paul out of step, and the license plate on the Volkswagen 28 IF referring to how old Paul would have been. More Beatle albums were sold during this time than any other. They had created another worldwide phenomenon, and everyone forgot what John had said in March of 1966 about their popularity. Now, in conclusion, we have looked at why the Beatles had to do this, and how they devised a long-term plan, and how they pulled it off. Some skeptics feel that Paul McCartney died in a car crash in 1966. You can check it out for yourself as the Beatles continue to sell more albums. The scheme, this plan, this genius that was that was and continues to be the Beatles proves that this was the greatest band that ever lived, not just in the studio but in the world of publicity.